Midair drone collision scare. United Airlines flight reports drone collision near San Diego. Investigation raises serious airspace safety questions. A routine morning flight turned into a tense moment in the skies when a United Airlines aircraft reported a possible midair collision with a drone while approaching San Diego International Airport. Now we take a deeper look and break down this entire story on the AI
Think
podcast.
about the last time you were driving down the highway at, say, 70 miles an hour.
Yeah.
You're just cruising along, maybe listening to music, totally relaxed, and then out of nowhere, just smack.
Oh, yeah, that terrifying sound.
Exactly. A tiny little rock kicks up from the truck in front of you and hits your windshield. It just jolts you. Your heart rate spikes for a second because, well, at that speed, even a tiny pebble registers to your brain as a massive, violent impact.
Right, because the human reflex is instantaneous. I mean, you
Mhm.
physically brace yourself before your conscious mind even processes what just hit the glass.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I want you to take that everyday highway experience and scale it up drastically. Imagine you aren't driving a car at 70 miles an hour. Imagine you are piloting a commercial airliner
Th-
carrying dozens of people.
That's a huge shift in perspective.
Right. You are descending through the clouds at close to 300 miles per hour. And suddenly, a rogue piece of metal appears right in your flight path. That is the exact scenario we are exploring in today's deep dive.
It's a terrifying thought, honestly.
It really is. We have a stack of recent aviation reports in front of us, and our mission today is to explore this really unsettling new reality in modern aviation. We are looking at what actually happens when everyday consumer technology collides with commercial airspace.
And, on a Wednesday morning, during a routine descent into San Diego International Airport, a pilot keyed the microphone and sent a message to air traffic control that highlights this exact collision of worlds. The pilot literally stated, "We hit a drone at around 3,000 feet."
Wow. I mean, that quote immediately grabs your attention. It implies a catastrophic event.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It sounds like the start of a disaster movie.
But what we are going to explore today is that while the initial report sounds like a tragedy, the actual physical evidence on the ground and the mystery that unfolds from it reveals a much deeper story. It tells us so much about aviation safety, the realities of modern skies, and honestly, the fascinating limits of human perception.
Right, because the core of this story lies in the tension between what a highly trained human being reports in the heat of a high-speed descent and the physical reality that investigators uncover once the aircraft is actually parked on the tarmac.
Okay, let's unpack this because we need to start with the immediate facts of that Wednesday morning to establish exactly what happened. So we're looking at United Airlines Flight 1980.
Yep, which is a Boeing 737.
Right. It departed from San Francisco at 6:53 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's a quick, standard domestic flight. They are on their descent into San Diego, passing through the 3,000-foot mark, which, by the way, is a highly congested altitude for an approaching aircraft.
It is. The flight crew is in what the industry calls a high workload environment right then. At 3,000 feet, they are configuring the aircraft for landing. They're communicating with air traffic control, running through multiple checklists, and, actively scanning the horizon.
The cognitive load must be immense.
It's massive. And right in the middle of that sequence, the crew reports this midair collision.
Yeah, and the pilot gets on the radio and gives a highly specific description. They didn't say they hit a bird or, an unidentifiable piece of debris. They called it a drone.
Yes.
And they described the object as small, red, and shiny.
And that specificity,
Yeah.
small, red, and shiny, it suggests a piece of manufactured hardware. It implies something consumer grade or perhaps custom built, just hanging right in the flight path of a commercial jet traveling at roughly 250 knots.
Which is wild, because after a report of a midair collision with a drone, you would expect emergency vehicles, panic, or at the very least, a diversion.
You would think so, yeah.
But the plane landed completely safely. All 48 passengers and the 6 crew members on board Flight 1980 deplaned normally at the gate. There were no emergency slides deployed. It was just a standard arrival.
Which is where the follow-up investigation complicates the narrative significantly.
Mm.
So United Airlines dispatched their maintenance team to inspect the Boeing 737. Because when an aircraft reports any kind of airborne strike, maintenance crews conduct a highly rigorous inspection.
Right, they don't just brush it off.
Exactly. They look closely at the leading edges of the wings, the engine cowlings, and specifically the redome. That's the rounded nose cone at the very front of the airplane.
See, I've always assumed the nose of the plane is solid metal, like the rest of the fuselage.
It actually isn't, because the radome houses the aircraft's weather radar dish. To allow those radar waves to pass through unimpeded, the radome's made of composite materials, typically fiberglass or specialized plastics.
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, and because it's not solid aluminum, it is exceptionally vulnerable to impact damage. Even a medium-sized bird hitting a radome at 250 knots will often just crush the composite material, leaving a massive visible indentation that requires immediate replacement.
But here's the crazy part. A spokesperson for United Airlines confirmed the maintenance crew found zero damage. Not a dent, not a scratch, not a smudge of paint on the radome or anywhere else on the aircraft.
Nothing at all.
And I'm struggling to understand the physics here. If a commercial jet hits a solid manufactured metal or plastic drone with heavy lithium-ion batteries at roughly 280 miles per hour, how is there absolutely zero damage? Was it just a glancing blow?
Well, the short answer is there wouldn't be zero damage, even with a glancing blow. Yeah, kinetic energy scales with the square velocity. So a 2-pound drone hitting an aircraft at those speeds carries the kinetic energy of a small artillery shell.
Wow, an artillery shell.
Yeah, it would leave a definitive mark. It would leave metallic or plastic debris embedded in the aircraft's skin. The stark physical reality on the ground, an immaculate, undamaged airplane, strongly suggests the aircraft did not make physical contact with a machine.
So they didn't hit a physical machine at all. That lack of physical damage really forces us to look at the identity of this small, red, and shiny object, which leads to the most perplexing detail in the source material, and that's the altitude discrepancy.
Right, because the math regarding the altitude fundamentally challenges the narrative of it being a consumer drone.
Exactly. The Federal Aviation Administration acknowledged the event, but they noted a major discrepancy in the report. The crew initially reported spotting this drone about 1,000 feet below them, while the aircraft was at 4,000 feet. So the object was hovering or flying around 3,000 feet.
And air traffic control immediately alerted nearby pilots to look out for it, right?
They did, but zero additional sightings were reported by anyone else in the sky, not a single one.
What's fascinating here is the regulatory landscape makes a drone at 3,000 feet highly improbable. By law, consumer drone flights are strictly capped at 400 feet above the ground.
400 feet? That's a huge difference from 3,000.
Exactly. The FAA instituted that hard ceiling precisely to create a buffer zone between consumer hobbyists and commercial aviation. A pilot requires special, heavily vetted authorization to fly a drone above that ceiling.
But even if someone decided to ignore the law, the technology itself actively fights against them doing it. I mean, the consumer drones you buy off the shelf simply aren't built to physically reach 3,000 feet under normal conditions.
That's right. Manufacturers build in robust safeguards. Most consumer drones utilize a technology called geofencing.
Oh, right, where it knows its location.
Yes. The drone has an internal GPS receiver. Its software constantly cross-references its real-time location against a stored 3D map of airspace regulations. If the drone detects it is near an airport or approaching that 400-foot vertical limit, the firmware intervenes.
So it just stops.
It will literally cut power to the motors or refuse to climb any higher, regardless of what the operator on the ground is doing with the joystick. The software physically locks the hardware out of that airspace.
So to get a standard drone to 3,000 feet, someone would have to possess the technical skills to hack the firmware and bypass federal software locks while also, modifying the battery to handle the thinner air and longer flight time.
Exactly, which is why aviation experts and industry analysts have debated this incident, and they've narrowed the possibilities down to basically 3 theories.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first is exactly what you just described, a heavily modified rogue drone operated by someone willfully bypassing every safety feature. The second theory is a misidentified airborne object, like a runaway Mylar party balloon that happened to be red and shiny, just floating on an updraft.
Yeah, and the third theory the FAA is considering is visual misinterpretation, which I think we have all experienced a grounded version of this, like I mentioned earlier with the highway. But think about this. You are driving down a dark, rural road at night, going reasonably fast. Out of the corner of your eye, you see a shape dart across the road.
Oh, sure, your heart jumps into your throat.
Exactly. You slam on the brakes, your pulse skyrockets because you are utterly convinced a deer just jumped in front of your car. But as your headlights illuminate the object, you realize it's just a floating plastic grocery bag tumbling in the wind.
Right, your brain just filled in the worst-case scenario.
Exactly. Your brain lacked complete information, so it instantly filled in the gaps with a worst-case scenario to keep you safe. Now, take that very normal human reflex and put it in a cockpit traveling at 280 miles per hour in the sky.
Well, the human visual system is simply not optimized for identifying small objects at 250 knots. When an aircraft is descending, pilots are hypervigilant, actively scanning for threats. But at those speeds, a phenomenon called saccadic masking comes into play.
Saccadic masking.
Yeah, the eye is darting around and the brain actually blurs or blocks out visual input during those rapid eye movements to prevent motion sickness. So when the eye does fixate on an object passing at a high relative speed, it only captures a fraction of a second of data.
So the brain then has to interpret a sudden blur of color and light.
Precisely. It relies on context and recent anxieties to interpret that blur. If a pilot is already subconsciously primed to worry about drones in the airspace, their brain might instantly categorize a flash of red mylar as a manufactured drone.
That makes total sense.
Plus, judging distance in the sky without ground reference points is notoriously difficult. A large red balloon 500 feet away can look identical to a small red drone 50 feet away. The visual data is ambiguous, so the brain makes a snap judgment.
Whether that red shiny object was a hacked piece of hardware, a stray birthday balloon, or just an optical illusion, the pilot's immediate default assumption that it was a drone is a massive signal. I mean, it points to a deep systemic anxiety shaping how pilots perceive the skies today.
Yes, the pilot didn't default to bird or weather balloon. The default threat assessment was drone. And the data surrounding modern airspace shows us exactly why that assumption makes logical sense to a flight crew right now.
So what does this all mean for you next time you're looking out the window seat? We have some hard data on this that recontextualizes the whole incident. Direct midair collisions between commercial jets and drones remain exceedingly rare.
Very rare, thankfully.
Right. However, the near misses are surging. An analysis conducted by the Associated Press for the year 2024 looked at near midair collision reports filed by pilots involving commercial aircraft at major U.S. airports. Drones accounted for nearly 2/3 of all those reports.
Let that sink in. 2/3 of all reported near misses. Pilots are no longer primarily worried about flocks of geese or, small Cessna aircraft drifting into their flight path. They are dealing with a decentralized influx of consumer technology.
It's a totally different landscape.
Completely. The barrier to entry for airspace used to be a pilot's license and an expensive airplane. Now, anyone with a credit card can purchase a device capable of occupying the same physical space as a passenger jet.
But wait, if 2/3 of the threats are drones, why aren't air traffic controllers seeing them on their screens and steering pilots around them? I mean, don't they have radar for this?
You'd think so, but the physics of traditional aviation radar make drones practically invisible. Primary radar works by broadcasting radio waves and listening for the echo that bounces back. The strength of that echo is determined by an object's radar cross-section.
Okay, so bigger object, bigger echo.
Exactly. Commercial jets are massive tubes of aluminum. They bounce back a massive, undeniable echo. But consumer drones are tiny, and they are largely constructed from plastics and carbon fiber.
And those materials don't reflect radio waves well.
Right. They absorb or scatter the waves, resulting in a microscopic radar cross-section. And even if a radar system is sensitive enough to detect something that small, it creates another problem.
Which is?
If air traffic control radar displayed every tiny object in the sky, every drone, every large bird, every weather anomaly, the controller's screen would just be a chaotic blizzard of dots.
Oh, wow. They wouldn't be able to see the actual planes.
Exactly. To keep the screens readable and functional, the software utilizes filtering algorithms that actively scrub out small, slow-moving returns. The system is intentionally designed to ignore them.
That is wild. This changes the entire dynamic for you the next time you're settling into your window seat. It highlights a vast disconnect. Because on paper, the FAA has strict rules. The 400-foot ceiling, the geofencing, the no-fly zones. But in reality, trying to police millions of cheap, invisible, unregulated objects is an entirely different challenge.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it creates a fundamentally asymmetrical threat environment. Commercial aviation is the most highly regulated transportation sector in the world. Every movement is tracked, recorded, and visible.
Right, highly predictable.
But drone operation at the consumer level is highly unpredictable. The San Diego incident reveals the psychological toll this asymmetrical threat takes on flight crews. They are forced to actively brace for impacts that radar can't predict and that regulatory frameworks struggle to prevent.
And this constant barrage of invisible, sometimes phantom threats raises a critical question for me. If pilots are constantly dodging plastic bags or balloons they mistake for drones, does the system risk becoming complacent? When a real, life-threatening emergency happens, does the safety net still hold?
That's the big question.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources provide a sharp contrast to the San Diego scare with another United Airlines event that occurred just weeks earlier on March 2nd.
Yes, Flight 2127. It serves as the perfect case study for how the aviation system handles a verified physical crisis.
So Flight 2127 was a Boeing 787, which is a much larger wide-body aircraft heading to Seattle. And shortly after takeoff, they had to make an emergency return to Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. This wasn't a mysterious object outside the window. This was a tangible, escalating crisis inside the aircraft.
Very tangible.
Smoke was reported filling the cabin, tied to a confirmed engine issue.
The stakes in this scenario are just exponentially higher. The Boeing 737 in San Diego had 48 passengers. This Boeing 787 had 268 people on board. When aircraft returns to the airport with active smoke in the cabin, it triggers the most severe protocols an industry has.
Yeah, when they landed at LAX, it wasn't a standard taxi to the gate. They stopped on the tarmac and deployed the emergency slides. We've all seen the safety cards in the seatbacks. A full-blown emergency evacuation means pushing 268 people down inflatable chutes as fast as physically possible.
And that evacuation protocol is a marvel of modern engineering and behavioral science. The FAA mandates that any commercial aircraft must be fully evacuated in under 90 seconds, even with half the exits blocked.
90 seconds for nearly 300 people.
Right. And to achieve that, the environment inside the cabin is heavily engineered. The materials on the seats are treated with specialized fire retardants to buy precious seconds. The floor lighting is designed to guide passengers through thick smoke when visibility drops to zero.
And the slides themselves aren't just like thick balloons. They are packed into the doors, connected to highly pressurized canisters of carbon dioxide and nitrogen. So when that door opens in an armed state, the slide inflates and becomes rigid enough to handle hundreds of people jumping onto it in a matter of seconds.
Which is incredible. And the outcome of Flight 2127 validates that entire engineered system. Out of 268 people sliding down emergency chutes onto a concrete runway during a smoke event, there was only one minor injury reported.
Just one minor injury.
Yes. The evacuation was swift, it was effective, and United quickly arranged an alternate aircraft to get everyone to their destination.
Look at the dichotomy here. On one hand, you have the external airspace, an unmanaged, decentralized environment where pilots are forced to rely on their naked eye to distinguish between a harmless balloon and a drone at 300 miles per hour.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have the internal environment of the aircraft, a strictly controlled, obsessively engineered ecosystem where every material, protocol, and mechanism is designed to mitigate disaster. In the unmanaged chaos of the San Diego incident, everyone landed safely. In the highly choreographed internal crisis at LAX, everyone walked away safely.
It's a brilliant contrast. The external environment is evolving faster than regulations can keep up. Consumer drones introduce an unpredictable variable. But the internal defenses engine, fire suppression systems, redundant hydraulics, rigorously drilled evacuation procedures, they remain incredibly reliable.
It's comforting, honestly.
It is. The FAA's investigation into the San Diego incident isn't about redesigning airplanes to survive drone strikes. It is about understanding the psychological and visual challenges pilots face so they don't have to suffer from visual misinterpretation in the first place.
So let's bring this all together for you. We started this deep dive with that chilling radio transmission over San Diego. We hit a drone at 3,000 feet. We uncovered how a reported physical collision left absolutely zero trace on the vulnerable fiberglass radome of a Boeing 737.
Which led us to the truth.
Exactly. That lack of evidence led us into the altitude anomalies of geofencing software and the fascinating reality of saccadic masking, where the human brain just fills in visual gaps at high speeds.
And the data confirmed that the pilot's assumption wasn't unfounded. With drones making up nearly two-thirds of airport near-miss reports, the anxieties in the modern cockpit have fundamentally shifted away from traditional hazards toward invisible, unregulated consumer tech.
And then we looked at the massive Boeing 787 emergency at LAX to see the system's response to a real crisis. It proved that when a tangible mechanical failure introduces smoke into a cabin of 268 people, the decades of engineering and 90-second evacuation protocols work exactly as intended.
The system works.
The skies are undoubtedly more crowded with consumer technology than at any point in history. The external threats are definitely changing, but the internal safety nets catching us remain uncompromisingly strong.
Absolutely. Though there is a final thought worth exploring as we look toward the immediate future.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we know consumer drones currently cause the vast majority of near misses, largely because they operate in a gray area of regulation. We also know that highly trained human pilots, traveling at hundreds of miles per hour, can easily suffer from visual misinterpretation, mistaking a harmless red Mylar balloon for a dangerous piece of metallic hardware.
Right.
What happens to this dynamic over the next decade? As our lower airspace becomes legally integrated with massive fleets of autonomous delivery drones dropping off packages, the sheer volume of legitimate vocalic traffic will explode.
Oh, wow.
Will the human eye, with all its biological limitations and masking reflexes, be enough to keep commercial aircraft safe during descents? Or will the aviation industry be forced to develop automated, artificial intelligence-driven optical systems just to tell the difference between a trick of the light and a devastating collision?
Man, that is a wild thing to think about. The next time a pebble kicks up and hits your windshield on the highway, pay attention to how your brain reacts before you even see the rock. You might wonder if you can trust your own eyes to tell you what the threat actually is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Okay, one question for you. How could a drone allegedly reach an altitude of around 3,000 feet when regulations from the Federal Aviation Administration restrict most drones to just 400 feet without special clearance? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.